March 21, 2022, a routine flight from Kunming to Guangzhou is just an hour from landing. On board China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735, 132 souls go about their journey, unaware that they will never reach their destination. The aircraft, a Boeing 737-800, is one of the most trusted in commercial aviation. The weather is clear, visibility perfect. There are no warnings, no turbulence, no sign of trouble. Then, without warning, everything changes. Flight 5735 drops. Not a controlled descent, not an emergency landing, a full, near-vertical dive. Inside the cockpit, there is silence, no distress call, no mayday, no sign that anyone is even reacting. China Eastern 5735, do you copy? Then, at 7,400 feet, the descent suddenly stops. The aircraft steadies for a few seconds. It even climbs, but that hope vanishes in an instant. The nose pitches forward again. The plane is diving. Fast, 2 minutes after the sudden plunge began. Flight 5735 slams into a remote mountainside in Guangxi province. The impact is catastrophic. 132 lives, gone in an instant. No distress call, no sign of mechanical failure, no warning of what was coming. A plane in perfect working condition, a clear, calm day, a highly experienced flight crew. So why did Flight 5735 fall from the sky? Was it a catastrophic failure? A deliberate act? Or something even more chilling? What investigators found inside the black boxes only made the mystery even deeper. It was supposed to be just another routine flight, China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735 was a daily route, Kunming to Guangzhou, a short, uneventful journey of just over an hour and a half. It was the kind of flight passengers barely thought about. For the 132 people on board, it was a day like any other. Business travelers heading to meetings, families returning home, students on their way back to school. None of them knew that they would never land. The aircraft waiting for them at the gate was a Boeing 737-800, one of the most reliable jets in aviation history. This was not the Boeing 737 MAX, the model plagued by software failures and deadly crashes. No, this aircraft had no known safety issues. It had undergone a full inspection just one day before. Everything was normal. Inside the cockpit, 2 highly trained pilots prepared for takeoff. The captain, a skilled aviator with over 6,000 flight hours. The first officer, a veteran with more than 31,000 hours in the skies. Between them, decades of experience. They had flown this route countless times. At 1:16 p.m., the engines roared to life. China Eastern 5735 cleared for takeoff. The flight leveled off at its cruising altitude of 29,000 feet. For the next hour, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Passengers settled in, some scrolling through their phones, others lost in conversation. The cabin crew moved through the aisles, serving drinks. Inside the cockpit, the pilots monitored their instruments, checking fuel levels and weather updates. It was routine, calm, uneventful. Then, at exactly 2:20 p.m., everything changed without warning. The nose of the aircraft pitched violently downward. The passengers had no time to react. Outside, the clear blue sky turned into a terrifying blur. The aircraft was falling, not descending, plummeting. 29,000 feet, 25,000, 20,000. A drop so fast that it felt like the air had been yanked from the cabin. In the cockpit, silence, no distress call, no emergency transmission, no mayday. China Eastern 5735, do you copy? Still, nothing. Then, at 7,400 feet, the descent suddenly stopped. Had the pilots regained control? Was this a recovery? A miracle? The answer came just seconds later. The nose pitched forward again. A second nosedive. This time, there was no stopping. 7,000 feet, 6,000, 5,000, 4,000. China Eastern 5735, respond. The aircraft was in freefall. At 2:22 p.m., Flight 5735 slammed into a mountainside in Guangxi province. 132 lives, gone in an instant. No warning, no sign of a struggle, no call for help. It was as if the plane had been ripped out of the sky. But how? Why? A plane in perfect condition, a clear day, an experienced flight crew. Something about this crash didn't add up. and what investigators would find inside the black boxes would make the mystery even darker. Aviation disasters don't happen like this. They usually unfold in stages: a warning light, a radio call, an urgent attempt to correct course. But China Eastern Airlines Flight 5735 didn't follow any of these patterns. There was no warning, no distress call, no sign of a struggle. 1 second, the aircraft was cruising at 29,000 feet. The next, it was falling, not spiraling, not gliding, plummeting. Investigators immediately knew this was no ordinary crash. Planes are built to withstand emergencies. Pilots train for engine failures, turbulence, even fires on board. But nothing in standard aviation procedures prepares a pilot for what happened to Flight 5735, because planes aren't designed to fall like this. At 2:20 p.m., the plane was cruising normally at 29,000 feet. By 2:21 p.m., it was plummeting toward the Earth. In just 1 minute, Flight 5735 lost 21,000 feet. The descent rate? Over 31,000 feet per minute. To put that into perspective, most planes descend at a controlled 1,500 feet per minute when preparing to land. This wasn't a descent. It was a free fall. The cockpit was silent. No mayday, no pan-pan. No sounds of a pilot struggling for control. The aircraft was in a total, catastrophic nosedive. And yet, no alarms sounded, no oxygen masks dropped, no indication that anything had failed mechanically. Was it a malfunction? A hijacking? Something worse? At 7,400 feet, the fall stopped. For a brief moment, the plane leveled out. It even climbed slightly. This didn't happen randomly. Someone, or something, stopped the fall. For a moment, it seemed as if Flight 5735 was stabilizing. Maybe the pilots had fought through the chaos. Maybe they had a chance. But then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the plane plunged again. 7,000 feet. 6,000. 5,000, 4,000, 3,000. At 2:22 p.m., Flight 5735 slammed into the Earth at nearly 700 miles per hour. There were no survivors, no bodies intact, just fragments of metal, of luggage, of lives, a plane in perfect condition, a clear day, an experienced crew. And yet, it fell out of the sky in 2 minutes. How? Why? If there were any answers, they would be inside here. But when investigators analyzed the flight data, what they found was even more disturbing than the crash itself. In modern aviation, the black boxes hold the key to every mystery. Every commercial aircraft carries 2 flight recorders: the flight data recorder, FDR, tracking altitude, speed, and control inputs, and the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, capturing every word spoken inside the cockpit. If there were answers to Flight 5735's terrifying nosedive, they would be inside these 2 devices. The data was intact. The recordings were clear, but what investigators found only deepened the mystery. The flight data recorder confirmed what radar had already shown. The descent was not gradual. It was instant. There was no autopilot disengagement warning. The engines remained at full power. Something, or someone, pushed the nose of the aircraft forward. Only 2 possibilities could explain this: a catastrophic mechanical failure, so severe that the pilots had no chance to recover, or a deliberate human action. And then came the most chilling discovery. At 7,400 feet, when the aircraft briefly stabilized, someone pulled back. Someone tried to regain control. For a moment, it worked. Then, the controls were forced forward again. This was not a mechanical failure. This was not turbulence. This was a battle for control. And in that battle, someone lost. If there was a struggle in the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, should have captured it. We should hear pilots calling out commands. We should hear alarms blaring. We should hear something. Instead, there was silence. No calls, no panic, no sounds of a fight. It was as if no one reacted at all. Were the pilots incapacitated? Was the cockpit overtaken? Or did one of the pilots do this on purpose? With no mechanical failure and no distress call, the world turned to a darker possibility. Did someone inside the cockpit crash this plane? If so, who? And why? There were only 2 people who had control of the aircraft: both highly trained, both experienced. One of them fought to pull up, but someone or something made sure they never did. What really happened inside the cockpit? The black boxes provided data, but not answers. And when investigators dug deeper, they found something even more disturbing. A plane does not crash without a reason. The black box data left investigators with a terrifying question. Could this have been a deliberate act? If Flight 5735 wasn't brought down by a mechanical failure, if there was no distress call, if someone inside the cockpit forced the nose down, then only one theory remained: pilot suicide. This would not be the first time. There is a haunting history of commercial pilots deliberately crashing their own planes. March 24, 2015, Germanwings Flight 9525. A co-pilot locks the captain out of the cockpit and initiates a controlled descent. The Airbus A320 slams into the French Alps at full speed. All 150 people on board gone. December 19, 1997, Silk Air Flight 185. A Boeing 737-300 suddenly dives from 35,000 feet, slamming into a river in Indonesia. The final report? Pilot suicide. October 31st, 1999, Egyptair Flight 990. A routine flight from New York to Cairo. Suddenly, the co-pilot whispers, "I rely on God," then forces the aircraft into a steep dive. The Boeing 767 crashes into the Atlantic Ocean. 217 lives lost. The same steep dive, the same rapid loss of altitude, the same lack of distress call. The flight path of China Eastern Airlines 5735 looked frighteningly familiar. An aircraft that had been flying normally, a sudden, unexplained dive, an attempt to pull up, then a final, deliberate plunge. The black box is confirmed. The controls were pushed forward intentionally. The plane was forced into its nosedive, and in those final moments, no one fought back. But then came the most disturbing question of all: who did it? Only two men had control of Flight 5735, the captain and the first officer. The captain, 6,709 flight hours, trained, competent, no history of misconduct. The first officer, 31,769 flight hours, a veteran pilot, well respected, two experienced men, two trusted professionals. Yet, one of them had to be responsible, or was someone else in that cockpit? If this was a struggle between pilots, we should hear yelling. We should hear commands. We should hear something, but the cockpit voice recorder captured nothing, no sounds of a fight, no last-minute distress call, no voices at all. It was as if they were already gone. Was this a case of pilot suicide? China refused to confirm this theory. Unlike Germanwings, unlike Silk Air, unlike Egyptair, the Chinese government never publicly blamed the pilots, which led to an even darker question. What if this wasn't suicide? What if someone else entered the cockpit? If so, who? Did Flight 5735 become the target of something even more disturbing? Was this a cockpit intrusion? Or was it something China refuses to admit? The official report raised more questions than answers, and when investigators pressed further, the case took a shocking turn. If Flight 5735 wasn't brought down by mechanical failure, if it wasn't pilot suicide, then another question remained. Was this a hijacking? In nearly every hijacking case in aviation history, the pilots send a distress signal, the plane changes course, the hijackers make demands. But on Flight 5735, none of that happened. No deviation in the flight path, no message to air traffic control, no sign of struggle. If someone hijacked this plane, they did it without a word. The timing of the nosedive was odd. Flight 5735 was only 40 minutes from landing. If this were a hijacking, the perpetrators would still have time to issue demands. So why would a hijacker force a crash immediately? If someone broke into the cockpit, why didn't the pilots fight back? Why was there only silence? After September 11, 2001, airlines worldwide reinforced cockpit security. The doors became bulletproof, passcodes were required for entry, and if the pilots suspected danger, they could deny access from inside, which raised a disturbing problem with the hijacking theory. How would an intruder get inside? Was this an inside job, or did the threat come from within? In nearly every hijacking in history, pilots find a way to send a signal, a coded distress call, an unexpected altitude change, even a single suspicious transmission. But in Flight 5735 nothing. This wasn't a hijacking. At least, not a normal one. Because if this were an attack, someone made sure the world would never know. There was another possibility. What if this wasn't an outside threat? What if someone inside the cockpit turned? A rogue crew member, a flight attendant with a stolen access code, a pilot who let someone in. Did someone on board betray the flight? Every flight has a manifest, a complete list of everyone on board. Authorities checked and rechecked the list, every passenger, every crew member, and then one name disappeared, one mysterious passenger, who was suddenly removed from the public record. Who was this person, and why would China erase their name? China never answered. They never released the full passenger list. They never explained why one name vanished. They never confirmed or denied a hijacking, which led investigators to an even darker question. 5735 was hijacked. If someone forced their way into the cockpit, why wouldn't China say so? Unless they already knew the answer. And if they did, why are they keeping it a secret? What was in that cockpit? Who was really in control? And why did this plane fall silently from the sky? This is it, the cockpit voice recorder, the one thing that could reveal what happened inside Flight 5735 in those final, terrifying minutes. Everything that was said in the cockpit, every command, every warning, every last sound, this device held the truth. But when investigators finally played the recording, what they heard only made the mystery worse. At first, everything was normal. The pilots spoke casually, discussed weather conditions, checked flight systems. 1:50 p.m., a flight attendant enters the cockpit, offering coffee. 1:55 p.m., the captain laughs, makes a comment about the weekend. Nothing unusual. Then, 2:19 p.m., the last ordinary transmission should begin descent in about 10 minutes. It should have been a routine approach. Instead, 60 seconds later, Flight 5735 was falling out of the sky. Then, it happened, 2:20 p.m., a sudden, sharp click, not an alarm, not an alert, a manual input, a physical movement inside the cockpit. And then, the aircraft lurched forward. The plane wasn't just descending, it was diving at a speed no commercial jet should ever reach. And in that moment, something even more disturbing happened. When a plane is in trouble, you expect to hear the pilots fighting for control, you expect to hear alarms blaring, you expect to hear desperate radio calls. But on Flight 5735, there was none of that. Just silence. Not a single distress call, not a single mayday, just the wind roaring past the fuselage, and a sound that no one, not even experts, could fully explain. It wasn't static, it wasn't interference, it was breathing, not panicked, not gasping, just calm, like someone watching, like someone waiting, as if whoever was in control knew exactly what they were doing. A single voice, a single word, barely audible, whispered, unrecognizable. Then, impact. The black box confirmed one thing. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. But by who? Was it one of the pilots? Was it an intruder? Or was it something even more disturbing? Because buried in the data, investigators found one final anomaly at 7,400 feet. Something or someone fought back, a second input, a desperate attempt to pull the aircraft up. For a moment, it worked. Flight 5735 stabilized. But then, a stronger force overpowered it. The nose was forced down again, and this time, there was no recovery. Was this a struggle inside the cockpit? A pilot fighting back? A hijacker in control? Or was something else at play? What China won't reveal might be the most terrifying truth of all. When air disasters happen, the truth is supposed to come out. Investigators release black box transcripts. They publish final reports. They tell the world exactly what went wrong. But for China Eastern Flight 5735, that didn't happen, because instead of answers, China gave the world silence. And what they refused to say might be the most disturbing part of all. When planes crash, the public is told why. Germanwings 9525, pilot suicide. Ethiopian Airlines 302, software failure. Air France 447, pilot confusion. but Flight 5735? For months after the crash, China's preliminary report was released, and what did it say? Absolutely nothing. No cause, no suspects, no conclusions, just vague technical data, but nothing that explained why the plane plunged straight into the ground. The only thing they admitted? The dive was deliberate. But by who? China refused to say. The fact that China has not released the black box transcripts is highly unusual. Every major crash in history, Malaysian Airlines MH17, Lion Air 610, even MH370, we got cockpit recordings, but with Flight 5735, nothing. Why? What's in those recordings that the public isn't allowed to hear? What did the pilots say in their last moments? Or worse, was someone else in that cockpit? Here's something strange. Just weeks before Flight 5735 fell from the sky, China Eastern Airlines fired multiple pilots for mental health concerns, for disciplinary reasons. Was one of them onboard Flight 5735? Or worse, did someone with a grudge against the airline have access to the cockpit? And then there's the other question. Did the airline know something was wrong before takeoff? Every cockpit door has a security system. Only the flight crew should be able to enter. And yet, when the plane started plunging, there were no emergency calls, no pilots fighting back, just that calm breathing. Who was this person? Were they a crew member, a disguised passenger, or did they force their way in? If this was a suicide crash, China would never admit it. If this was a hijacking, they would never reveal it. If this was something even worse, they would bury it. Because in China, secrecy always wins. And for the families of 132 people, that means they may never know the truth. A plane in perfect condition, an experienced flight crew, a clear sky. Yet, Flight 5735 plunged into the ground in just 2 minutes. Was it a suicidal pilot? A cockpit takeover? A government cover-up? We may never know, because the truth, whatever it is, didn't go down with the plane. It was buried afterward. Aviation has never been safer, but what happened to Flight 5735 could happen again, because when disasters are left unsolved, they're doomed to repeat themselves. What do you think happened? Was it a mechanical failure, a deliberate act, or did China bury the truth? What's your theory? Leave a comment, subscribe for more investigations, and never forget, the sky may seem safe, but mysteries still linger above us. Thank you for watching.